in the 70s and 80s into the 90s, let's say. And then moved to New York in about 2000. Spent 20 years in New York and have just moved back this summer to assume this position at UCLA. So it's geographically homecoming. It's also homecoming for me in a disciplinary way because I started out in archaeological conservation, left it for contemporary art, and now I've come back and bringing contemporary art with me to the ancient world. But that's a different lecture. In the spirit of the exhibition that's on right now, Untitled for Music, which, as Monica described, is improvisational. The artists are musicians, and they're drawing from a number of works. Some of the works are participatory and engage people in the gallery in different ways. So in that spirit, I've developed an unscripted presentation tonight, and I invite you to ask me questions, and we can improvise, move off in different directions. Otherwise, I'll just talk to the slides as they come through. So I decided to give you a little bit of my own biography to help you understand not only where I come from, but where my field comes from, of art conservation. I'm assuming most people in the audience have no idea what I do or what a time-based media conservator is. So I'm starting there, but interrupt me. If you want to talk technology, we can talk technology. But I'll try to talk at a level of basic challenges that conservators and museums have in collecting ephemeral works of art. Now, to begin with my own biography, I started out, as I mentioned, as an archaeological conservator. And this meant working in the field. Group is an excavation where I worked for many years in Turkey. As a discipline, we're very material-based. We're trained in material sciences. We know all about how metals corrode in marine environments, and saline, subterranean environments, and then what to do about that corrosion once we excavate the materials. So in working on an excavation like this, we had the artifacts, we would study them, we would identify the materials of manufacture, processes of deterioration, and how we can slow down that deterioration. We would lift objects from the field. This is a group lifting painting fragments off the wall. We take them back to our labs. This is the site that I was the director of conservation for many years. I'm teaching a course here on metals conservation. We would prepare them for exhibitions sometimes, but more often just for study by the archaeologists. So that's objects conservation in the field. After working at LACMA, the Getty, and a number of other museums, I opened up a private practice based in Santa Barbara and Los Angeles, which I ran for 16 years. I worked for many different museums and collectors and galleries in Southern California and Western states. And I was sort of surprised because my practice shifted towards contemporary art. And MoMA had just started in Los Angeles a year before I opened my practice, so I became their de facto conservator. So I did a lot of work for MoMA during those years. And to shift gears a little bit, here is a Claes Oldenburg chocolate sculpture. And it's called Avalanche. He designed it, I think with a little bit of humor, as a model for a ride for Disneyland. And the idea is that these boulders that look like chocolate sway back and forth, and you would go through them in some kind of a car on rails. And Disney wasn't interested. So the model was collected actually by a curator at LACMA, and it got infested by beetles. So the beetles ate all the chocolate. Basically, it was chocolate candies with clear resin poured over the top. By the time it came to my studio, the resin had yellowed, the beetles had eaten all the chocolate, and inside this plexiglass box was just a bunch of insect frass and dead insects and larvae. I had live one right here, sort of victoriously sitting on top of the chocolates. And but again, it's a material problem, right? There's chocolate, there's resin, there's dead insects, there's live insects. I know how to get rid of insects. I know how to preserve the resin, but I didn't know what to do or what the artist would want. And this is where I said it's a very material-based discipline, but in fact, we're always addressing aesthetic concerns, artist concerns for presentation, community concerns. So we contacted the artist and said, you know, we could inject chocolate in all those little holes that the insects drilled, or we could fill it full of brown pigmented wax. So it would look like it's chocolate, but it wouldn't be chocolate. It would be more stable because insects wouldn't eat it in the future. And he said, let's go with wax. So we did, which is important because he could have said, no, conceptually, the work would not be the work if it wasn't chocolate. But chocolate itself, or edibility by insects, wasn't conceptually part of the work. He did joke and he said, if you can fragrant it with strawberry scent, that would be all the better. Anyway, that's it after conservation. So I dealt with that kind of issue for years. And outdoor sculpture. So that became an area of specialization. I worked with a lot of cities, public art collections, and museums as well. This is a project in Hawaii, a sculpture that I worked on. And I'm showing you this one because it brought up new challenges. This was a sculpture constructed to honor King Kamehameha, who was Hawaii's first king, and has a very long, complicated history, which I won't go into, other than to say that in this little town on the Big Island, there are celebrations on Kamehameha Day, which is a state holiday, where people have a parade, give him gifts, and honor him. And the state of Hawaii, who brought me in, so the one thing I should do is figure out how to get the paint off, because it had been gold leaf back in the 19th century. So I'm out there in the community, people start coming up and say, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm out sent by the state to figure out how to restore the sculpture. And one woman said, well, whatever you do, don't take the paint off. It's interesting. I said, why? And she said, well, we paint him so we can relate to him as a human being.
As what?
As a human being. He was born in this community, and he was really considered the father figure in this community. So they painted him regularly in these sort of, it's kind of bright, but lifelike colors. So I devised a project that was community-based and engaged community in the research that I was doing, engaged them in the work that I was doing, and turned the decision over to them. Do you want to paint it in the future, or do you want to strip the paint off and gold leaf it? After 3 years of community engagement, they decided that they wanted to keep it painted. So we did strip the paint off, because the paint itself had no significance to them. So I could deal with corrosion and structural problems with the sculpture, and then they chose the paint layers, and we repainted it up on the scaffolding. This is an image here of a blessing that took place at the commencement of the project. So you can see it's material-based as a field, but we address concerns of aesthetics, of artist concerns, of community concerns with presentation, and what stories are told. In this case, what narratives are told about the Native Hawaiian past through the way the sculpture looks. And this was a project of empowerment in which I empowered community members to be part of this process, but then also to tell their stories through a lot of community activities. So that's my background. As I said, I moved to New York in 2000, started teaching at NYU, but shortly after, MoMA approached me about being a time-based media conservator. Or actually, the field wasn't called that, they just said media conservator. So in 2004, I started working with MoMA. after scratching my head, saying, well, why are you contacting me? And they said, well, there isn't anyone in the field that specializes in this area, and if you'd be interested in doing this, we would love for you to come in and take care of our video, audio, and software-based collections. And I honestly knew nothing about this coming in. They said I would have to learn a whole lot of technology really fast, which I agreed to, and I did. But it was interesting. They said they wanted to have somebody put a conservation mind on this problem. These are works that are technology-based, and that technology will change and change and change over time. So the monitors that it might be shown on, the playback equipment that are used, the audio or video files that may reside on a computer or a analog tape will have to change because the exhibition technology changes over time. So this brought in a whole new way of thinking for me. We call this variable media. So media traditionally might be oil on canvas, might be bronze. Here, the medium is the moving image or the audio file. But it's going to be played in different ways over time, and it will change as the technology changes. So it's variable in that it can be played in different media over the years. So this is the lab that we set up to do technical analysis of the files. We digitized over 2,000 analog videotapes and audio tapes. This is a production company where we did that digitization project through more technical observation of files on computers or developed software. So that was the material and technical side of the work. But again, I was working with artists. I've got one example here of a work by Namjoon Paik, who is a Korean artist, was a Korean artist who lived in New York and elsewhere. He was the pioneer of video art. So he really is the person who started video art. And there are a number of pieces of his at MoMA. This piece here is a player piano, or a piano, with 16 monitors on top, and on the sides, and on the floor, showing 4 different tracks of video. So 2 of the tracks come from these players here. They're feeding video to various monitors, depicting the life of John Cage with lots of psychedelic colors, and there's audio as well, so it's playing music, which I'll describe in a minute. There's a video camera here and a video camera here, pushing live feed of the piano keys moving and of the hammers going back and forth as the piano's playing. He modified the piano to have a player component. So we put in a floppy disk, and it would play jazz show tunes really loud in the gallery. So it's just a really lively piece. We did an analysis of it, and we learned that a number of the monitors didn't work, that the floppy disk playback equipment was outdated. We couldn't replace parts, so we wanted to migrate it to new technologies. And it was, had lots of problems, and we didn't know quite what to do once again. So he had died. So we interviewed a curator he had worked with, other curators, the head of his estate, people in museums that had also conserved his works. And after about a year of investigation, launched a project. In the end, we sourced 2 complete backup sets of CRT monitors in Korea and had them brought so we would have backups in the future for the museum. I took the piano out to Long Island to a piano repair piano to repair the hammers and keys, and also to replace the player unit with a new piano unit that could be used with a remote. So the files were digital, and we then repaired repaired the CRT monitors that weren't working, big project. But it was driven by his concerns that he had stated. He was very influenced by John Cage, so he liked the idea of chance. He liked the idea of his works taking different directions in the future as they're conserved. However, he did say he really liked CRT technology. That's cathode ray tube technology, like an old-fashioned television. So we felt we shouldn't replace them with flat screen technology. That's why we source 2 complete backup sets of round televisions.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, how would you know, though, that he wouldn't want the passage of time to not affect, I mean, that he would want it, how do we know that he wouldn't want the passage of time to affect the art? And
I wish I could give a whole lecture on option pipe, and I have. I've written an article about this. I'll just say that he had a sense of humor, and he would often, even when he was putting an exhibit up, ask people, what do you think we should do? And he would just sort of be guided by whoever was around what they would do. So he delegated responsibility in creating his work, but also in exhibiting and conserving his work. So in short, we didn't know.
you're interpreting, and there's a certain amount of interpretation.
Yeah. But the article I wrote was, I learned what other museums had done in similar situations, and they'd all made different decisions. So I wrote this article sort of arguing that for Namjin Pai's work, they are going to have different itineraries in the future, and that actually reflects what he would want. Yeah. He's a very unusual and fascinating artist. So, I think this works. Let's see. Oh, there it is. This is it after conservation. Moving on. Oops. Now, moving on. So my toolkit increased over time as I was moving from archaeological to contemporary art to outdoor sculpture to time-based media, and working with artists who were alive. I realized very early on that what I should be doing as a conservator is documenting their concerns for future staff at the museum. So while the artist was alive, I had the opportunity to interview them and ask them, well, how'd you make it? What technologies did you use? How's it been shown in the past? But also, if, say, CRT monitors don't exist in the future, could we swap them out with flat screen? Or what are the defining properties of this work, given that the technology is going to change, the materials are going to change? How would you like to see it in the future? So I was trying to answer questions for people in the future that would be asking them. So I did a lot of interviews with amazing artists, so it was a really cool job. This is me interviewing Matthew Barney, with a curator at MoMA and a curator at the Sehgal in Switzerland about his work. So we did a lot of interviews, and that documentation went into the museum files for future staff. Since I was teaching, I also worked with a lot of students to train them in doing artist interviews. Here we are at the Met with 2 of the students. This is the artist and the technology piece that the Metropolitan Museum of Art had collected. They led the interview, they prepared for it, and then museum staff was in the audience, so they asked the artist more questions. And the video and the transcript will go into the files of the museum once again.
Are those accessible to people outside of the museum? Like, could other scholars or interested parties go and access that?
No.
That would be something to work on.
I wrote an article on that too. Because it really angered me
That
that
it's not accessible.
the museums
Proprietary.
are gathering all this documentation that would be very interesting to the public to help them understand these works. So what I was becoming aware of was that museums have all of this information about their works, but the public can't access it. So a member of the public might walk into a performance work or an installation work and experience the way the curator decided to exhibit it at that time, but they don't know the whole history of all the times it's been exhibited and how it's been different, nor what the artist would have said. So I created, as Monica mentioned, a nonprofit organization called Voices in Contemporary Art, specifically to address this concern. And one of the things the organization does is give workshops for people who want to interview artists, so training in interviewing artists, but we have a lot of programming, there's a lot of information on the website about communicating information and collaborating. So it's not just the conservator, it's also the curator, the artist, and all of the other professions involved in this working together to gather information, and I would argue disseminate it. And if we have time, I'll tell you about another project I'm doing to address that. In 2007, MoMA started collecting performance art. So now I became a performance art conservator. And I and other staff are scratching our heads to say, well, what does this even mean? And now I'm really getting to the topic of the evening, collecting the ephemeral. So we were acquiring the rights to re-perform performance works in the future. Meaning that the artist was telling us, you can bring in new performers in the future to re-perform the work. So that meant, as I said before, with technology art, it had to be this underlying artist's intention or concept that had to be preserved, since the technology is going to change and change. In this case, the performers are going to change and change. And it's interesting, we turned our heads to the performing arts and read a lot of the theory, a lot of the practices on training in music and dance and theater, and drew comparisons, but this was different. So we were creating something entirely new by building documentation that would allow people in the future to re-perform something. And the works that we were collecting, because of the works that were being created today, are based on modern dance, meaning interpretation, chants, improvisation, participatory works. So that it's not like ballet that is highly choreographed with very strict movements. This is meant to be interpreted by new performers, at least all the works that we collected while I was there. And so it meant, once again, interviewing the artists. This is the artist here for this work, and the artwork is there are performers or people hired to ask people in the gallery if they could measure them. It's called Measuring the Universe. So they would draw a line on top of their head with a felt pen, write their name and the date they were born, like your mom would do on the wall. And so by the end of the exhibition, there'd be a black line around the room that sort of measured the average height of the museum visitor. So we interviewed him. He trained people. We videoed the interview. We videoed him performing the work. We made a video of these other people performing the work. So we were building that documentation. And in my interview, I asked him, well, what should the qualifications be? What should the people be told? What should they wear? How aggressive should they be in asking people if they want to be measured? What happens if there's a window? Do we go across the window? I mean, just if you think about it, there's just a lot of really practical questions that he hadn't really thought of. But in discussion, we discussed them. So all that documentation went into the museum files. Got another example here. This is Jennifer, Laura, and Rio. If this were, they cut a hole in a piano, and the performer stands in the middle of the piano and plays Beethoven upside down and backwards. And they roll the piano, which is on casters, around the gallery. And fine. My job is to build the documentation. So I interview the artist. I asked, what should the background of the performers be? They have to be classic pianists. And they have to really be able to play Beethoven. They obviously have to be willing to do this and interested in doing it. What should they wear? Should we tune the piano? All practical questions. And then finally I said, can they just like roll a piano around anywhere? And they said, oh, no. There's a very specific itinerary for each of the performers in this exhibit that's coming up. And, I'm glad I asked. I said, well, how would we know what they are? And I said, oh, no, I've drawn little diagrams for each performer. I said, can we have those? He said, sure. So this came up in the interview. And this is one of the itineraries that a performer named Amir took around MoMA's atrium. So you can see it's not tight, but each of those itineraries for each performer was really different. I threw this diagram in just to remind us all that in the performing arts and dance, they have very specific notation languages for communicating how people, the steps for the dance. We didn't need to use lab notation or any of these various forms of documentation because of the kind of words that we were collecting, but it's there if we see whatever we need. Two more examples. This is a work by a Spanish artist, and it's called Archaic Disobedience. It's the work that the architecture department brought in. And I remember the collections manager called me one day and said, Glenn, we're buying a performative piece of architecture, and I have no idea how to acquire this thing or how, what we're going to do. I said, don't worry, I'm a veteran now after years of doing it. So the work is locationally specific. There has to be an IKEA in the region where it's exhibited, because the artist and his team come, they put a call out to the community for anyone that has bought a product at IKEA and has altered it. So these are the disobedience. And then they do a series of interviews with these people. They select individuals to perform their alteration of IKEA products. So here we've got somebody cutting on hair. Someone sits up here and plays music. Somebody's making hot dogs. So all these activities that people were doing with their IKEA products, they altered one way or the other. But one of the interesting things is he wants it to be very different at each venue. That process is still there, but he wants it to look really different. So that's what it looked like when we exhibited in Brooklyn, at Queens, and that's what it looked like in Madrid. So we call this variability. So again, I needed to define what we call work-defining properties in order for people in the future to know how it can vary. My last example, I have more slides, but after this, I'm going to just open it up for discussion. And as I said, I can go on, but we can probably close it after the discussions. This is Tino Sehgal, a really interesting artist based in Berlin, who is not a performance artist. He creates interpretive situations. And I say that because I actually called him a performance artist during a lecture at the Smithsonian a number of years ago. And the next time I saw him, he said, "Oh, Glenn, I just want to remind you I'm not a performance artist." I knew that. I said, "Well, I saw a video of the lecture that you did." got busted. So trying to use the language of the artist, which is very deliberate and for a good reason. He creates works of art that are interactive with people in various ways, challenges the people, and they're not performers, they're interpreters of situations. He wants the works to be exhibited as if they were object-based works, so not just a one-off situation, but over a period of time in the museum. We acquired a work called Kiss, and part of his request is that we not take any photographs of the work or videos, or show the public any videos, no signage on the wall. He didn't want anything in writing from the transaction. He wanted the entire transaction to be oral. And what he's doing is challenging the institutional memory of a museum that acquires his work. So let me just describe the acquisition policy. And I don't have a picture of the work because he doesn't want us to photograph it. First of all, Kiss is a roughly 8-minute choreographed loop where two people in the gallery, it has to be a man and a woman, because I asked, he said no, it has to be a man and a woman, move in and out of positions in which they are kissing each other. And each of these positions is reminiscent of a known work of art. There's a Rodin, a Brancusi, and so some people might recognize the works of art as they move into these positions and then out of them over this 8-minute loop. They have to be trained dancers, and the work has to be shown over, I think it's a 8-week period. I might be wrong, so I'm losing my memory. And yeah, that's essentially it. So the acquisition process was one like none I had ever experienced. Because we couldn't put anything in writing, we all met in a big room. So he was there, his gallerist was there, his lawyer was there, the curator that brought it in was there, all the other senior curators at MoMA were there, the registrar was there, I was there as the conservator, and our lawyer was there. And we had discussed with his gallery the contract before, which had to be orally transacted. And there were 4 major points and some minor points. And he wanted his lawyer to recite all the points except for one point that we had disagreed with. So the points were like the interpreters needed to be paid wages that reflected what dancers are paid in the region, that it needs to be exhibited for a certain period of time, that no signage is allowed in the gallery. And the one thing that we had disagreed with was he asked the museum to stop anyone in the public from taking photographs. And if they put anything up on the web, we should ask them to take it down. We said we're not in the business of stopping people from putting, video, audio, visual materials up on the web, so we're not going to chase after our museum visitors. And you said that guards are not supposed to interact with people, and there can't be any signage, like no photography. So if the guard sees somebody taking a photograph and it seems right, they can go up to them and say, the artist prefers that you not take a photograph. So our lawyer has had to recite that point in the contract, and we would try our best to honor his wishes. In my interview, after the contract was orally delivered, our curator that brought it in and his gallerist stood up and shook hands, so the contract was sealed, and the money was sent electronically, no check. He doesn't fly. He takes boats and ground transportation wherever he goes. So he's a really interesting man. And as I said, he's challenging the institutional memory, which I'm concerned about. I'm now gone. The curator that brought it in was gone. Other people have changed positions in the museum. and it hasn't been shown yet at MoMA. I wanted to have an annual rehearsal of the work, but it just never happened. And we did loan it to the Guggenheim once, and we asked him, because the people interpreting it at certain points in the choreographed movement have the right to say, "Kiss by Tino Sehgal, 2003. So they can say this to anyone that walks in the room. And we said, well, after they say that, can they say, "On loan from the Museum of Modern Art"? And he said, yes.
Glenn, I'm curious actually about the loan process.
Yeah.
I mean, loan forms and things like that.
Nothing in writing. It was all oral.
Did he give his rationale for that? Like, why did he not want the writing?
As I understand it, it comes from a place of wanting conversation, interaction, participatory processes to be integral to his art. And in my interviews, I did have an interview with him afterwards. I pulled out my recorder and I said, "Do you mind if I record it?" He said, "Well, actually, yes, I do." I said, "Yeah, I thought you would." He said, "Please take the batteries out of the recorder." And he said, "No, I'm joking." So I put the recorder aside. We had an oral interview. And one of the things I asked is, I'm worried about the preservation of this work because you're, asking us to just remember everything. And he said that he realizes that the preservation is entirely dependent on the curatorial will to exhibit the work in the future. So I don't know. But he's, I found it a really interesting challenge.
I saw the work at the NCA Chicago.
Oh, you did?
And they do have writing on their website about it.
MoMA does have on its website in the collection pages, "Kiss Tino Sehgal" and a date, but there's no image of it.
There's no image, but there's writing describing it.
Yes, that's okay.
That's okay?
That's okay. Yeah,
That's
so-
one thing when I wrote some advice once at a day, but I took you, and when the performers are trained, we're also receiving everything orally. And so I did a piece, the associations in London, got trained there, and there was 20 of us that got to Paris to teach the French crew. And so there is this idea somehow that there's these generations of what we call the Tino family that will pass this information on. So I know people with kids and someone and they teach someone.
Yeah,
It's also,
it's really neat. I like it. I mean, if somebody has interpreted the work and he approves of their interpretation, they can be authorized to teach other people, which it's just it's nice. It's a challenge. It's an institutional challenge. We'll see.
Glenn, the practical question, those big pieces with the player piano and the video and then the IKEA, that gets stored by the Museum of Modern Art and
Warehouses.
Warehouse.
Big warehouses in Queens.
And they take photographs or drawings of how to put it back together.
Oh, we made a whole video of the installers. We put all the cables and wires and connecting devices out on a table, and the installers and the AV team actually went through every single piece of equipment and said what it is, what it does, where it connects to, because we realized that in 20 years, all the cables and connectors, in 5 years, they're all going to be different. And if somebody opens this box full of wires and cables, and they're not necessarily going to know. So we built all that documentation. We videoed them putting the work together. So yeah, all that documentation. So my work really shifted from fixing broken sculptures to building documentation and institutional capacity to show these
Will
works.
the videos last forever?
No, and so that's it. I mean, they were analog, so we digitized them. So now they're files. This was a huge decision for me because all of the literature I read, which mainly came out of libraries and archives, was about copying from tape to tape. So every 10 years, you need to copy a tape onto a new format. You need to keep it in cooled off storage. I'm faced with a collection of over 2,000 works, and some of them with multiple tapes. It would have been a huge capital project to copy all those tapes onto new tapes. in an era where they weren't even selling new tapes anymore. So the writing was on the wall, and I just thought, it's better to use that money to digitize it all. And I got some blowback from people. Now everyone does it, but that was early on. People were saying, no, it's supposed to be on tape. It's like, well, where are you even going to buy the tape? Or where are you going to buy the equipment to play the tape? So back in 2007, that was a huge decision.
So, Glenn, is it possible that there are some museums that just they aren't going to be able to preserve the?
I would say a huge amount of media works that are being collected today are not going to be able to be shown in the future. It's really sad. Now, I mean, I was the first time-based media conservator in the country in 2005, and the Guggenheim hired one. Now there's probably about 12 in museums around the country. But now there's a training program at NYU, so a younger generation is coming up, actually being taught how to do this work. So there are now professionals coming into the world that know how to do it, and now museums need to start hiring those people.
Right, you almost wonder whether a museum, even a large museum that's invested in this, is going to actually, at some point, start picking and choosing what they are going to retain
Yeah.
and preserve, basically.
And for better or for worse, what gets attention, what gets conservation attention, are works that are going to be exhibited or loaned to another museum. I mean, everyone is just so busy behind the scenes of museums. It's very rare that you can actually say, well, let's do something with this work that hasn't been shown for 10 years.
Can you say a few words about the role of the curator and the department? For instance, at MoMA, I know some of the people that you showed. Which department brought them in, and to what degree does the curator have an impact in terms of its longevity? Because you also mentioned that some of the curators have left.
Yeah. First of all, I thought I would just be working with the curatorial department that was called Media and Performance Art at MoMA. But what I realized soon after getting there was that all of the curatorial departments were collecting media. So I was the only conservator that was working with prints and illustrated books, with architecture and design, with paintings and sculpture, media performance art, because they were all collecting this stuff. So I worked with a lot of curators who were bringing it in, and learned very quickly that some of them have deep technical knowledge and others don't. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to. So we worked in collaboration often. I loved curators that knew technology and were really interested. In all of my interviews, I always asked for a curator to be present with the artist. Some of them would engage in conversation, and some would just sit back. But you know, the curators, I also wrote a paper on the roles that everybody has in museums and what motivates different professions. And curators are motivated by acquiring works of art, big names, big works, showing works of art, and that's how they get merit, get recognized. Artists are recognized to some extent by the museums that acquire their works. So if you're in MoMA, that's already like a very big deal. Conservators really are behind-the-scenes people. We don't get anything out of a work of art being acquired or exhibited, and we take pride in just helping shepherd these works into the future. That's where our satisfaction comes from. And so I would argue that the conservator, whose eye is on the past and the future of the work, is the right person to be doing a lot of this work that I described, but always collaboratively. Always, you know, if the artist can be there, if the curator can be there, that's all the better. Work as a team. And does that answer your question?
Well, also, you know, the second part was the life of the work. For instance, I'm a computer media artist, and some of the work that I produced back in the day that got acquired cannot be played anymore.
Yeah.
So
It must be really frustrating as an artist to know your work at a museum and not only not being exhibited, but not you know.
So basically, we show the documentation of the work,
Yeah.
as opposed to the work itself.
That's, you know, I could give examples of works that can't be shown anymore, and often the documentations has to stand in for the work in the future. Software works. I worked with a computer scientist for a lot of works where we got the source code from artists and documented the source code and did everything we could for future programmers that would come in. But it's going to be a tough battle.
And maybe I can just add something else. I was at a conference at the Ludwig Museum in Cologne, and it was about the topic of what is the original work. And the media curator from the Pompidou refused to copy the works, the videotapes, because she said the copy is not the original.
We deal a lot with questions of authenticity and replication, and people have different opinions on this. I would say that she's a rare example. I think most museum professionals now realize that to keep a work alive, you have to copy it, and your work has to be devoted to keeping it as true as possible to what the artist would want. You know what? I think it's already 8. I suggest we close it down, and I can hang out for a while if anybody wants to continue the conversation. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming.